My name is Susan and I need to confess. I never told anyone this before. Not my husband. Not my mother. Not the two sons I raised. For 30 years, the name Lily lived only inside my chest, like a second heartbeat that beat in the dark. The night she was born, the ceiling of that hospital room was a pale, cracked white. I counted every fissure while the nurse wiped her clean. I was 17. My hands were shaking so badly the nurse had to hold the pen for me to sign the papers. I remember the sound of the fluorescent lights, a low, constant hum that never stopped. That hum is still in my ears when I can't sleep, which is most nights. She was born on a Tuesday at 3:47 in the afternoon. I held her for exactly 11 minutes. I counted. She weighed 6 pounds, 3 ounces. She had a tiny scratch on her right cheek from the delivery. Her eyes were closed, but her fingers curled around mine with a strength that made me think for one absurd second that she was holding on to me as hard as I was holding on to her. I named her Lily because it was the only name I had ever dreamed of giving a daughter. I whispered it in her ear just once so she would hear it before she forgot me. "You're Lily," I said. "And I love you. And I'm so sorry." Then a nurse took her away. I never saw her again. I told myself it was the right thing. That she would have a better life. That I was too young, too broke, too broken. That my parents would never forgive me and they probably wouldn't. I told myself all the things you tell yourself when you are 17 and terrified and alone in a room that smells of antiseptic and regret. The adoption was closed. No names. No letters. No future. I signed the papers, walked out of the hospital and never spoke of it again. But I never stopped thinking about her. Every birthday, every Christmas, every time I saw a little girl with dark hair on the playground, I would freeze, stare, and feel a cold stone drop in my stomach. My husband would ask what was wrong and I would say, "Nothing," with a smile that I had practiced in the mirror for years. I married at 23. Had my first son at 25. A second at 28. I built a life of normal things. School runs, PTA meetings, grocery list, Sunday dinners. But the secret of Lily was a second life I lived in silence. It was the room I locked inside myself, the one I never opened, not even to God. Then on my 47th birthday a young woman knocked on my door. I opened it and the moment I saw her face I knew. She had my eyes. My mother's jaw. That tiny scratch on her right cheek had faded into a faint scar, but it was still there. She looked at me and said, "My name is Lily. I think you're my birth mother." I thought my heart would stop. But what she said next broke me in a way I could never have prepared for. She said, "I'm not angry. I'm here to thank you." I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I just stood in the doorway of the house I had lived in for 20 years. With my husband in the kitchen and my sons upstairs, all of them believing I was a woman without secrets. And I felt the entire weight of 30 years of silence collapse on my chest. I wanted to close the door. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I did the one thing I had never done before. I let her in. If stories like this touch you deeply too, subscribe to the channel now. Because what you just heard is only the beginning of a confession that will change everything. Before Lily came back, I had pretty much convinced myself that I was fine. That the secret was buried deep enough. That I had built a good life and that the past was just a shadow I could outrun. I grew up in a small town in Oregon, the daughter of a mechanic and a housewife who went to church every Sunday. My father was a quiet man who smelled of motor oil and beer. My mother was devout, the kind of Catholic who believed that guilt was a virtue and that silence was the best way to avoid shame. I learned very early that some things were not to be talked about. Feelings were private. Mistakes were buried. And the worst thing you could do was bring shame to the family. I met Michael when I was 22 at a friend's barbecue. He was tall, kind-eyed, and laughed easily. He worked in construction, saved his paychecks, and treated me like I was something precious. We married after a year. I wore a white dress my mother had bought on sale. I stood in the church and promised to love, honor, and obey, and I meant every word. But I never told him about Lily. I told myself it didn't matter. That the adoption was closed. That the baby had a new life. That bringing it up would only hurt him and hurt me. So I locked it away behind a door I swore I would never open. Our first son, Daniel, was born on a rainy Tuesday. I held him in my arms and felt a love so fierce it scared me. But underneath that love there was a whisper. You already did this with someone else. I pushed it down. I became a mother again, and this time I was ready. I stayed home. I made baby food from scratch. I read parenting books. I kissed every bruise, wiped every tear, and told myself I was a good mother. When my second son, Caleb, arrived 2 years later, I felt complete. There was no room in my life for the ghost of a girl I had given away. We had a house with a white picket fence, a yellow kitchen, a garden where I grew tomatoes every summer. Michael worked long hours and I filled my days with carpools, volunteer work, and church potlucks. I played the role so well that I almost believed it myself. But there were cracks. Nights when I would wake up at 3 a.m. with the sound of a fluorescent light humming in my ears. Days when I saw a teenage girl with dark hair and I would freeze in the grocery aisle, my cart blocking the way, my heart pounding like a trapped bird. I would tell myself it was nothing. Just a memory. Just a bad dream. But the truth was that Lily was never gone. She lived in the back of my throat, a word I could never speak. I started going to church more often. I lit candles. I prayed. But my prayers were hollow rote. Words I said because I was supposed to say them. I never once confessed the secret. Not in the confessional, not in my heart. I was too afraid that if I said it out loud, God would take away everything I had built. So I stayed silent. And the silence grew heavier with every year. I didn't recognize myself anymore. The woman in the mirror was a stranger wearing my face, smiling at neighbors, baking casseroles, pretending that the 17-year-old girl who gave birth alone in that hospital room had never existed. But she did exist. And she was waiting for the day when the door would open and the truth would walk in. I should have confessed sooner. I know that now. But I was too proud. Too frightened. Too convinced that keeping the secret was protecting everyone. My husband, my sons, my parents, even Lily herself. I was wrong. Secrets don't protect anyone. They just wait. If this story has moved you so far, write in the comments the word confession. Your words will help others who carry secrets of their own to find the courage to speak. I was 16 when I met him. His name was Ryan and he was 19, a friend of my older brother's who had just dropped out of college. He had dark hair and a smile that made my stomach flip. He paid attention to me in a way that no one else did. Not my parents who were too busy with work and church, not my brother who ignored me, not the boys at school who thought I was just a quiet, bookish girl. Ryan looked at me like I was the only person in the room. It was intoxicating. We started meeting in secret. He would pick me up after my parents were asleep, and we would drive to a dirt road outside town. We parked under the stars and he would talk about his dreams of becoming a musician, of leaving Oregon, of seeing the world. I believed every word. He told me I was beautiful, that I was special, that he had never felt this way about anyone. I was young and desperate to be loved, and I swallowed his promises like candy. The first time we were together, it was in the back of his car, on a blanket he had spread over the torn seats. It hurt. I bled. I cried a little, but I told myself it was normal. That this was what love meant. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. My mother had warned me about boys like Ryan, about being ruined, about bringing shame to the family. I was terrified that she would find out. So I kept it a secret, the first of many. A month later I missed my period. I bought a test at a pharmacy 2 towns over, paid in cash, and took it in a gas station bathroom. The 2 pink lines appeared faster than I could process. I sat on the toilet staring at the stick and I felt the floor drop out from under me. I called Ryan from a payphone. He didn't answer. I called again. And again. He finally picked up 3 days later and his voice was different. Cold, distant, annoyed. You need to take care of it, he said. Take care of it? I whispered. How? I don't know. Find a clinic. Something. He never called me again. I was 17, pregnant and completely alone. I couldn't tell my parents. My father would have beaten me, maybe literally. My mother would have cried and made it about her shame. So I hid it. I wore baggy clothes. I stopped eating much, hoping the baby would just go away. But she didn't. She grew. I felt her kick for the first time when I was 5 months along in the middle of a history class. I put my hand on my belly and I felt a tiny foot press against my palm, and I burst into tears in the middle of a lesson about World War II. The teacher asked if I was okay. I said I had cramps. He believed me. That night I lay on my bed and stared at the ceiling, and I made a decision. I would give the baby up for adoption. I would tell my parents I was going to visit a cousin for the summer. I would disappear to a home for unwed mothers, have the baby, sign the papers, and come back as if nothing had happened. I would bury the whole thing so deep that no one would ever know. I didn't think about whether I wanted to keep her. I didn't allow myself to want. I just put one foot in front of the other like a robot. I called a number from a pamphlet I found in the school counselor's office. They sent a car to pick me up on a Saturday morning. I told my parents I was going to a church retreat. My mother hugged me and said she was proud of my faith. I wanted to throw up. That was the moment my life collapsed. I just didn't know it yet. The home for unwed mothers was a converted farmhouse on the outskirts of a town called Silverton. There were 8 of us, girls between 14 and 19, all hiding, all ashamed, all waiting for our bellies to empty so we could go back to pretending. The nuns who ran the place were kind but firm. They called us the girls, and reminded us that our sacrifice was noble. I hated that word. Noble. It felt like a lie wrapped in a prayer. I spent 4 months there. I read books from the small library. I wrote letters to my parents that I never sent. I stared out the window at the rain. I learned to knit from an elderly volunteer, and I made a small pink blanket for the baby, for Lily, even though I knew I would never give it to her. Every night I lay in my narrow bed, feeling her move inside me, and I talked to her. I told her about the stars in Oregon. I told her about my favorite tree behind the house. I told her that I loved her and that I was sorry, and that I hoped she would forgive me one day. I knew she wouldn't. I didn't believe in forgiveness. I believed in consequences. The birth was fast. 4 hours from first contraction to delivery. I screamed until my throat was raw. A nurse held my hand and told me to push. The moment she was born, they placed her on my chest and I counted the seconds. 11 minutes. They had to take her. I had signed the papers. The adoptive parents were waiting. I kissed her forehead, smelled her skin, a scent I still remember, warm and milky and sweet, and then they pulled her away. I never saw her again. I walked out of that farmhouse with empty arms and a secret that would follow me forever. I went home. I finished high school. I pretended. I became an expert at the double life. The girl who smiled through the pain, who laughed at parties, who dated and married and had children, while inside a wound bled that never stopped. The double life wasn't just about hiding Lily. It was about hiding myself. The real me, the terrified 17-year-old who had held her daughter for 11 minutes, was locked in a soundproof room in my soul. I visited her sometimes late at night when the house was quiet and Michael was asleep. I would sit in the dark and whisper to her, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But I never told anyone. I convinced myself that it was better this way. That the past was dead. That I had to protect my family from the truth. I told myself lies that I rehearsed so often they started to feel real. But lies have a way of rotting from the inside. I started to lose pieces of myself. My laughter, my patience, my ability to sleep through the night. I would snap at my sons for small things. I would cry in the shower where no one could hear. I would stare at the church altar and feel nothing. My mother warned me years ago that secrets would destroy me. She didn't know hers or she knew mine. I never figured it out. But she said, "A lie is a weight you carry until you either drop it or it crushes you." Thought I could carry it forever. I was wrong. When Daniel was 7, he asked me a question that stopped my heart. He was sitting at the kitchen table drawing a picture. It was a stick figure of a woman holding a baby. He said, "Mom, who is this?" I looked at the drawing. The woman had brown hair like mine. The baby had a little scratch on her cheek. I dropped the plate I was holding. It shattered on the floor. "Where did you see that?" I asked, my voice shaking. He shrugged. "I don't know. It just came to me." I swept up the pieces with trembling hands. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. That night I sat on the back porch and stared at the stars, and I felt something shift inside me. A crack in the wall I had built. I thought God had abandoned me long ago, but maybe he hadn't. Maybe he was sending me a sign. Or maybe it was just my own guilt, leaking out through my son's innocent drawing. The next day I went to church. I knelt in the pew, the wood hard against my knees, and I tried to pray. But the words wouldn't come. I just sat there, empty, listening to the silence. A priest walked by and asked if I needed to confess. I said no. But I didn't leave. I stayed until the candles burned down. A week later I found an old photograph in a box in the garage. It was from my high school yearbook. A picture of me when I was 16, before everything happened. I looked at the girl in the photo and I felt a strange pity. She had no idea what was coming. She thought she had her whole life ahead of her. She had no idea that she would spend 30 years carrying a secret that would slowly eat her alive. I put the photo in my nightstand drawer. I didn't show it to anyone. But I looked at it every night before I went to sleep, and I whispered, "I'm sorry." I didn't know who I was sorry to, the girl in the photo, Lily, God, myself. All of them, I guess. If you believe no one is lost to God, subscribe now to the channel, because the next part of this story will show you how a single knock on a door can change everything. The years went by. Daniel graduated high school. Caleb started college. Michael retired. I should have felt proud, peaceful, fulfilled. Instead, I felt like a woman standing on a sinking ship, watching the water rise. The secret had grown so heavy that I could barely breathe. I started having panic attacks in public, in the grocery store, at church, in the car when I was stopped at a red light. My heart would race, my hands would tremble, and I would feel like the world was about to collapse. I went to a doctor. He prescribed anti-anxiety medication. I took it, but it only dulled the edges. I needed something else. Confession, maybe. But I was too terrified to speak. What if Michael found out? What if my sons looked at me differently? What if they thought I was a monster for giving up a child? I had spent 30 years building a life of respectability, and I was about to lose it all because of a ghost. I started having nightmares. In the dreams, I was back in that hospital room holding Lily, but this time she was grown up. She looked at me with ice-cold eyes and said, "You abandoned me. I will never forgive you." I would wake up screaming. Michael would hold me and ask what was wrong. I would say, "Just a bad dream," and turn away. But the dreams didn't stop. They got worse. One night, I dreamed that I was walking down a long, dark hallway. At the end there was a door. I opened it, and inside was a room full of empty cradles. I heard a baby crying, but I couldn't find her. I woke up with tears soaking the pillow. I knew deep down that I had to tell the truth. But I didn't have the courage. Then on my 47th birthday the doorbell rang. I was making coffee. Michael was at the hardware store. The boys were away. I opened the door expecting a delivery. Instead, a young woman stood on my porch. She had dark hair, my eyes, and a faint scar on her right cheek. She looked at me like she had been looking at my photograph for years. "My name is Lily," she said. "I think you're my birth mother." I dropped the mug. It shattered on the concrete. I stared at her, unable to speak. My mind was a screaming void. I thought about closing the door. I thought about pretending I didn't know her. But my feet wouldn't move. She stood there, calm, patient, as if she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. And then she smiled. It was a warm, sad smile. The smile of someone who had already forgiven a sin she never committed. "I'm not angry," she said. "I'm here to thank you." I still hear that sound. The shatter of the mug, the softness of her voice, the impossible weight of her words. That was the moment my life collapsed. But this time it collapsed into something else. Something I never expected. If this story has moved you so far, write in the comments the word confession. I know it sounds small, but your words are a light for others who are still in the dark. I let her inside. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my family had shared thousands of meals, where I had packed lunches, helped with homework, celebrated birthdays. Now it was the table where 30 years of silence would break. She was 28 years old, a high school teacher in Portland. She had grown up with loving adoptive parents, a brother, a dog. She had a calm, steady voice and eyes that held no accusation. She told me she had always known she was adopted. Her parents had told her when she was 6 in a gentle, age-appropriate way. She had never felt a need to search for her birth mother, until recently. Why now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She hesitated. I had a dream, she said. A woman holding me, counting seconds. She kept saying, 11 minutes. I love you. I'm sorry. I didn't know what it meant, but it felt real. I needed to know. I started sobbing. Not the quiet, controlled tears I had perfected over the years, but ugly, gasping sobs that shook my whole body. She didn't move. She didn't try to touch me. She just let me cry. When I finally stopped, she reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. I found you through the adoption agency, she said. They gave me your name and address. I spent 3 months deciding if I should come. I didn't want to disrupt your life. I didn't want to cause pain. But you came anyway, I said. Because I needed to say thank you. I stared at her. Thank you? Lily, I abandoned you. I wasn't strong enough to keep you. I gave you away. She shook her head. You gave me a chance. You were 17. You had no resources. You could have had an abortion. You could have kept me and given me a broken life. Instead, you gave me to parents who loved me, who had stability, who could give me everything you couldn't. That's not abandonment. That's sacrifice. I didn't know how to respond. I had spent 30 years convinced that I was a monster. And here was the person I had hurt the most, telling me I was something else. Something good. It didn't feel real. It felt like a hallucination. She stayed for 2 hours. We talked about her childhood, her job, her dreams. She played piano. She was training for a marathon. She had a boyfriend she was thinking of marrying. She was happy. Genuinely happy. And I realized with a shock that her happiness didn't erase my guilt. But it did something else. It gave me permission to forgive myself. Before she left, she looked at me with a shy, hopeful expression. Can I ask you one thing? Anything, I said. Can I call you Mom? Just once. The word hit me like a wave. I nodded, unable to speak. Thank you, Mom, she said. She left. I stood in the doorway and watched her car drive away. The street was quiet. The sun was setting. I went inside, sat on the floor of my kitchen and wept. But the story doesn't end there. The moment of grace was real, but it didn't erase the years of lying. I still had to face my husband, my sons, the life I had built on a foundation of omission. That night Michael came home. I told him I needed to talk. We sat on the couch and I told him everything. The pregnancy, Ryan, the adoption, the 30 years of silence. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Why didn't you tell me? He finally asked. His voice was flat, not angry but not forgiving either. I was ashamed, I said. I was afraid you would leave me. That you would think I was a bad person. He stood up and walked to the window. I married you because I loved who I thought you were, he said. Now I don't know who you are. That night he slept on the couch. I lay in our bed alone, staring at the ceiling. The same ceiling I had stared at in the hospital room 30 years ago. The same cracks, the same white paint, the same hum of silence. I thought about Lily's words, thank you. But they felt far away now. All I felt was shame. The rock bottom of this confession wasn't the moment I gave her up. It was the moment I realized I had wronged the people who loved me most. The next morning I called my sons. Daniel drove home from his apartment in the city. Caleb took a day off from work. I sat them down in the same kitchen where Lily had sat and I told them the truth. Daniel stared at me with cold, wounded eyes. Caleb didn't say anything. He just got up, walked out, and didn't return for a week. I thought I had lost everything. I stopped going to church. I stopped answering the phone. I stayed in bed for days, barely eating, barely moving. Michael eventually came back to the bedroom, but we slept in silence. The house felt like a tomb. I had spent my whole life building walls to protect the secret, and now that the secret was out, I had nothing left. No peace. No dignity. No hope. I was a hollow shell. One night, I lay in the dark and whispered to myself, I never told anyone this before. But I had. I told Lily. I told Michael. I told my sons. And now I was more alone than ever. I don't know why I did it. Maybe because I had nowhere else to go. Maybe because my mother's voice, always echoing, said, when you have nothing else, you have God. So I went to the church in the middle of the day when it was empty. I walked past the pews, past the altar, and knelt in front of a candle that someone had left burning. I didn't pray with the words I had learned. I prayed with my brokenness. I spoke out loud to no one but the silence. God, I don't know if you're there. I don't know if you care. But I'm tired. I'm so tired. I've carried this weight for 30 years and I can't carry it anymore. I know I did wrong. I know I lied. I know I was a coward. But I don't know how to be forgiven. I don't know how to forgive myself. I stopped. The candle flickered. A bird sang outside. The air smelled of dust and old wood. I waited for a sign. A voice. A feeling. Nothing came. But then I remembered Lily's face. Her gratitude. Her forgiveness. And I realized that maybe God wasn't a voice in the sky. Maybe he was the daughter I had given away, who had grown up to offer me grace I didn't deserve. Okay, I whispered. I'll try. I sat there for another hour. I didn't receive a revelation. I didn't feel a warmth. But something shifted inside me, a small crack of light in the darkness. For the first time in 30 years, I believed that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to be defined by my worst moment. If you believe that no one is beyond hope, subscribe to the channel now. This story isn't about me. It's about the grace that found me when I least expected it. It has been 2 years since Lily knocked on my door. We see each other now. Not often, she lives 3 hours away, but we talk on the phone every week. She calls me Mom, and I call her Lily. I've met her boyfriend. She's met my sons who are still processing but are trying. Michael and I are learning to rebuild trust. Some days it feels impossible. Other days we laugh together and I remember why I married him. The scars are still there. I still wake up at 3 a.m. sometimes, hearing the hum of a fluorescent light. I still see the look on my son Caleb's face when he walked out of the kitchen. I still feel the weight of 30 years of lies pressing on my chest. But the weight is lighter now. I shared it. I confessed. And the people who love me, flawed, imperfect, wounded, are still here. Lily sent me a letter last month. In it she wrote, "Thank you for having the courage to let me in. You gave me life twice. Once by birth and once by telling the truth." I keep that letter in my nightstand drawer next to the photo of the girl I used to be. I look at them both every night. The girl who was afraid. The woman who came back. They are the same person held together by a thread of grace. I never told anyone this before. But now you know. And I hope somehow it helps someone else who is carrying a secret too heavy to bear. You are not alone. You are not beyond forgiveness. And the door you fear to open might lead to the very grace you've been praying for. This is my confession. And it's not over yet. If you want to share your own confession, leave a comment or visit our community. Your story matters.